Good morning. It's good to be back with you. Sort of under the weather last week and wasn't able to do video this week. But there were a couple things as we continue in this Steadfast Love playlist, our journey through Lent this year. The psalm that we looked at last week had a couple terms associated with it, and I wanted to highlight those because you run into them occasionally in the Psalms. At the beginning of the Psalm, it referred to the Psalm as being a maskil, Maskil. And it's a term that appears with 13 of our Psalms and is often translated as instruction, contemplation, or a skillful song, suggesting a type of psalm intended for teaching or reflection. Like I said, it's only there for those 13 psalms, but you see it, and if you're like me, you wonder what in the world is he talking about. Now, also in the Psalms, you will occasionally, in fact, 74 times in the Hebrew Bible, you will encounter the word Selah, Selah, periodically through the psalm. And it seems to be an instruction to pause, to rest, to just take a breath before you go on to the next sentence there. So I wanted to lift those up to you because you see those in the Psalms, and we don't often take time to talk about why they're there and what they mean. Today we look at Psalm 126, and Psalm 126 is a part of a group of 15 Psalms that are labeled a Psalm of Ascent. I talked a little bit about how the Psalms were used and the fact that Jerusalem is up here on top of a mountain. And in order to get to Jerusalem from any direction, you had to come up. And as the people traveled, they would often recite the Psalms as a call and response as they traveled together in a group. And there are some Psalms that lend themselves to this more readily than others, but apparently there was this group of Psalms that were used when they were coming to the end of their journey and ascending the mountain to be in Jerusalem, to be able to worship in the temple, that were used at this time. And Psalm 126 is one of those Psalms. So let's get to the Psalm. When the Lord changed Zion's circumstances for the better, it was like we had been dreaming. Our mouths were suddenly filled with laughter, our tongues filled with shouts, with joyful shouts. It was even said at that time among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. Yes, the Lord has done great things for us. We are overjoyed. Lord, change our circumstances for the better. Like dry streams in the desert waste, let those who plant with tears reap the harvest with joyful shouts. Let those who go out crying and carrying their seed come home with joyful shouts, carrying bales of grain. You see, there's between verse 3 and 4, there's a change in the sentiment there. Commentators divided that the psalm has two verses. The first verse is the joyful acclamation for what God has done. And the second verse, an acknowledgement of the times that they're presently encountering, looking forward to that time when they could again sing the first verse, the joyful response to what God has done to them. There's no author given for this psalm, but it's generally attributed to the time when the exile was coming to an end and the Hebrew people were starting to return to Jerusalem. The first of these time frames is a time of Ezra and Nehemiah. Um, Ezra the priest and Nehemiah the layman, or I may have them reversed there, but I think Ezra was a priest. One was a priest and the other was the lay leader, so to speak. Brought the people back. One oversaw the rebuilding of the wall and the rebuilding of the temple, and the other oversaw the reinstitution of worship in the temple. But this is thought to have been written by Ezra as a result or in response to Cyrus allowing the Hebrew people and enabling the Hebrew people to return home. And so you have that joy and of what God has done in getting them released and allowing them to come back. There's another school of thought on the authorship, a minority school that connects to the psalm from last week. One of the possibilities of our last week's psalm was that it could have been written by David during the time that his son Absalom was rising up in rebellion to David's leadership, trying to overthrow David. But generally it's thought that it's this time of return from the exile. Some context and themes that come out of this: restoration. I apologize for my coughing here. The psalm focuses on God's act of restoring the fortunes of his people, and while it focuses on that, there's a joy and gratitude expressed through laughter, singing, and reflecting the profound impact of God's restoration. But you also have in that second verse the sowing of tears, the reaping with joy, and a prayer for continued restoration. So I got one sucking on now. Application. How can we look at this in our life today? Well, we do go through difficult times. As I was thinking about this, since we're on a 5-year anniversary of when all of this, when COVID came upon us, and everything changed in our world for a period of time. Of looking back, I look back at that, and God's faithfulness as God's people were not able to come together and worship together in the churches. The innovative ways that God inspired church leaders to reach out and connect with people, and to trust in God's promises, even in these times of sorrow. I know during that time of COVID that there was a lot of anguish and a lot of grief over, are we ever going to know a better time again? And God has always promised that there will be a better time. He's not ever promised that we would not have to suffer, but he's always promised that there would be a better day, always. But even in those difficult times, to continue to sow those seeds of faith and hope, knowing that God's going to bring the harvest of joy. Any comments or reflections that you might have on this psalm of ascent here?
That's kind of curious about in one of the early verses there. It said about is as if we were dreaming.
Yeah.
And then they're awakening to all of this celebration and joy.
Well, when they were in exile, dream was the only thing they had. After after a generation or two, the only thing that they had to connect were these stories that inspired dreams of what had been, because these people had not experienced that themselves. So that's all they would have had. Well, we're nearing the end of our Lenten playlist. We have one more psalm next week, Psalm 118, that we'll be looking at some of the verses of that psalm. And then we move into Palm Sunday and Holy Week as we make that journey with Christ into Jerusalem and the suffering that led to the cross and the resurrection. So may God's blessings be upon you as you join us and hear what Pastor Dawn has to enlighten us with as we continue this journey.